big slip-ons. Other than my sandals, I was a little cold today.
All right. It was an interesting idea to me about what are we willing to change, what are we willing to do in order to be with somebody else. And that is sort of somewhere where I want to stay for the other sermon. So, I'm curious, would anybody be willing to share why you decided to come to church this morning? Would anybody be willing to share why you decided to come to church this morning? Yeah, Patrick.
To be fed spiritually.
To be fed spiritually. All right, you were looking for something, right?
To hear the word.
To hear what?
The word.
To hear the word, all right? To learn about Jesus. It's been a rough week. Yeah, that you're looking for. Yes, Ms. McKenna.
Otherwise, I woke up for nothing.
But that's a really, really important thing, though, because again, the first act of worship is showing up. All right? And there's something that drives us, all right? Whether it is, that we're hungering for something, whether we are looking for the word, whether we are expecting to learn something, whether we are showing up because our family is coming, whether we are showing up because it makes us feel good. Now I want to ask you another question. This time I'm not looking for an answer out loud, all right? But I want to give you a little time to think about this. Who from your life right now do you wish was here with you this morning? Who from your family, who from your friends, who from your relatives, your work, who do you wish was here with you right now? Maybe it's a best friend, a sibling, a parent, your spouse, your child, your grandchild. Now for perhaps the hardest question. And again, please no answers out loud. What would it take for that person to be here in church this morning with you? What would it take? And would you be willing to do what it took? I want you to know that I will never ask you to go somewhere that I'm not willing to go myself, so let me share about my person. My person is someone I love dearly, and I have the utmost respect for. Someone I've always looked up to, and one of the reasons why I believe in Jesus, and why one of the reasons I am a pastor. The person who I wish was here with me this morning has been going through rough times in many different areas of their life. And this person who has taught me so much and shown me so much about Christ feels abandoned by God right now and is unsure of their desire and their place in the church. On top of all of this, I may have hurt this person's feelings and strained our relationship through words, actions, or inactions. What would I be willing to do to help this person that I dearly love? What would I be willing to do to be with them in worship today? I ask myself this question. I ask you this question in light of our second reading today from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. Now you all know that I tend to almost always preach from the gospel lesson. And that I really, really, really don't care for Paul all that much. I find him wordy, I find him hard to understand, and I often feel like he goes around and around and around in circles. And yet, the Apostle Paul's words from verses 22 and 23 stopped me in my tracks this week. I have become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, so that I may share in its blessings. Paul is talking about the religious and cultural sacrifices that he is willing to make in order to share the gospel. When he is with Jewish people, he is willing to uphold their traditions and values. When Paul is with Gentiles, when he's with non-Jews, he is willing to break those traditions and values that he grew up with and was comfortable with. Paul loses friends and family. Paul gets beaten up. He gets stoned. He loses his freedom and then loses his very life. All for the sake of sharing the gospel with just one more person. Just one more. Would I be willing to make similar sacrifices? Would you? I'd like to say that I would. As your pastor, I would love to stand up here and say, I would do anything to share the gospel. And yet, there are times that I find us fighting over silly stuff about worship time, about whose seat is whose, about what kind of music is given in worship. I've gotten to share a little bit about my trip to the Holy Land, but haven't yet said much about the first part of our trip, to Jordan, where we spent time and working with and talking with refugees. And I found myself sitting in a house with two sisters-in-law. They were married to brothers. And they had 4 kids, and one had another one on the way. And they had been in Jordan for 9 months. They are Iraqi Christians. They were chased out of their homes by ISIS. The oldest daughter in the house, she had shrapnel in her arm. And they don't have enough money to get it out. They showed me pictures of their burned down house. What happens is that ISIS shows up, and if they find out there are Christians in a village, they find those houses and they mark them with a giant red N for Nazarene. The family then has 24 hours to get out before the house is burned and they are killed. And yet the truly incredible thing to me is that these people who have the red N's put on their houses, their choice is not to get guns, not to get bombs. They've started wearing a red N around their necks to claim their devotion to Jesus. What? To date, the tiny country of Jordan has continued to take in refugees from wars and violence in Egypt, the Sudan, Somalia, Syria, and Iraq. Jordan has about a population of about 10 million. To date, they have given shelter to an estimated 2.7 million desperate people. Any guesses on how many our country took in last year? 90,000. I was ashamed. I'm sitting there in this lady's room, and they're talking about how desperate they are. You're talking about shrapnel. They're talking about, the horrible things that they've suffered through. And they told me, yep, we applied to the United States. No room. And this is again where the words of the Apostle Paul hit me. Sure, I love you, Jesus. You've forgiven me, you've saved me, you've given me eternal life. I would do anything for the sake of the gospel. Unless, of course, it's hard, difficult, uncomfortable, or costly. Other than that, I'm willing to do anything. Now, I know that none of us have any direct control over the number of refugees that our country admits on a yearly basis. And yet we are called to look at the ways that we speak about refugees in our churches, in our communities, and on our Facebook pages. We do have that power within our control. What's even more, though, is the level of control that we have over who we welcome into our lives and who we welcome into our churches. So I want to go back to the hardest of my initial questions. What would you be willing to do to have that person you desperately wish was beside you here in worship? What would you be willing to risk? What would you be willing to give? What would you be willing to sacrifice so that some might be saved? We may have to be vulnerable to being rejected one more time, right? We may have asked 100 times. We might have to open ourselves up to ridicule for placing value on church and worship. We may have to take the risk of admitting to someone how important they are to us and telling them how much we miss them. I don't know about you, but I got a phone call to make later. We do it all for the sake of the gospel, so that we may share in its blessings. Go in peace, to love and serve the Lord, and share the good news.